On to our first conversation today, with airlines losing as much as $138 billion in 2020 due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the industry. The International Air Transport Association say that they expect the loss to drop to $52 billion this year and $12 billion in the year 2022. Hassan El-Houry is the CEO of the National Aviation Services. He joins me now to discuss how companies across the aviation space are re-strategizing post-pandemic. Thank you so much for your time on the show today, Hassan. Let's first speak to what your thoughts are on the recovery trajectory for players across the aviation space like yourself, and also how the pandemic is affecting your strategy as a company.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. As you correctly stated, airlines across the world are losing a lot of money, and across the globe, it's been about $50 billion. In Africa, in 2020, airlines lost about $7 billion. The bigger risk, however, is that about 7 million jobs are directly at risk. And those are airline jobs. They were directly at risk as a result of the COVID pandemic. Airlines also support millions of other jobs in tourism, in logistics, in transportation, and so many other sectors. So all of those jobs were highly at risk as a result of the pandemic. How has the COVID pandemic impacted the airlines and the strategy? Well, what we are seeing today is that the profile of airlines in Africa is changing. We're seeing a lot more regional airlines picking up the routes that international airlines used to provide before the COVID pandemic. Abidjan, for example, in Côte d'Ivoire, today is at 100% recovery to its pre-COVID volumes. Entebbe in Uganda is back at 70%. Liberia is at 70%. Morocco is also one of the places which has seen a decent recovery as a result of the vaccinations. But recently they announced that they would stop the flights from the UK, for example, as a result of an increase in the number of COVID cases. So the recovery has not been uniform across Africa. Of course, Africa is 54 countries. Each country has its own economics. Each country has its own trajectory. And so I think we have to look at each country by itself when we talk about the recovery.
But for companies like yours that play across the chain, how are you re-strategizing to take advantage of some of the opportunities that the changes here are bringing out?
That's a great question. So when the pandemic first hit in March of 2020, we focused on cash. Cash was king. We needed to make sure that our company can sustain 2 or 3 years of a complete shutdown. And that was our order of business for 3 months. Thereafter, we underwent a very strict cost control, process and cost cutting process. And we were ruthless in our cost cutting exercise, unfortunately. Thereafter, we started to look at 2 things. The first one is using technology to support the revival of the airline industry. We launched the world's first COVID passport in Kuwait. Not many people know this, however. And the second thing was we started to talk to ground handling companies across Africa that were struggling. And we were very fortunate that over the past year, we launched operations in 16 new airports. 16. In the DRC, we launched 3 new airports. In South Africa, we acquired Bid'Air, which was in Joburg, Cape Town, so many other, Durban, so many other big airports. We launched in Guinea-Bissau, and most recently we announced our acquisition in Kenya. So a total of 16 airports in the past year. So while most of our competitors were struggling to survive, we thrived in the past year.
And vaccines definitely going to play a major role in this recovery. And for players like yourself, I'd like to understand what your medium-term outlook is on how things will pan out.
Look, we're seeing a recovery. There's no doubt about that. However, unfortunately, the vaccine drive in Africa has been lagging behind the rest of the world. I mean, I was surprised to read that something about 3% of eligible adults across the African continent have been vaccinated. Only 3%. In the US, people are talking about 60, 70%. In Europe, it's in the 80s and 90s. But in Africa, it's so low. There's been only a few countries that have vaccinated more than 10%. Morocco is one of them, Namibia, Seychelles, Mauritius. But mostly, the vaccine drive has been very, very, very low. And, I don't want to place blame on anyone, but I think the world needs to wake up and realize that COVID is not a national problem. COVID is an international problem. And we as the world, as a globe, we need to come together and solve this problem. Because if we look at it very, very narrow vision, then we're going to end up with many more variants, and the rest of the world is going to have to lock down. So we have to work together as a globe, as a world, and make sure that people are getting vaccinated across the world.
All right, let's get into your expansion plans. Earlier, you were talking about some of the strategic partnerships you made into 16 new airports, also that partnership you recently had with Kenya. But are we going to see something similar across West Africa? And if so, what are the countries in your sights?
Look, we are today the largest airport services company on the African continent. We're in more than 20 countries, probably 55 or more airports. We want to maintain that lead. That's our objective. As I said, we're in 20 countries. There's 54 countries. So we still have a long way to go. West Africa, East Africa, North and South, we're looking across the continent. We want to maintain that lead. We want to make sure that we're providing good services, safe, secure, high-quality services to the airlines and passengers and cargo airlines across the African continent. Africans make up 12% of the world's population, but only 2.5% of the world's travelers. We want to work together as an industry to bridge that gap. We want to get more people from the African continent onto aircraft, onto flights, going across the continent and to the rest of the world.
All right, now, on the focus of your next set of investments, I know sometime in 2018, you committed to invest about $50 million over the next 3 years on the continent. What can we expect looking in the medium term?
Look, when we made that announcement in 2018, I think we should have increased the number because we easily surpassed that $50 million investment in the African continent. In the African continent's aviation sector. I think looking forward, we should double or triple that number. There are so many opportunities. Africa is really one of the places which has tremendous opportunity in the aviation sector. There's so much for us to do. As I said, we want to bridge the gap from 12% of the world's population, but only 2.5% of the world's travelers. So there's a huge way for us to go. We're looking across the continent. I think there are tremendous opportunities.
All right, thank you so much for your time. Hassan El-Houry, there is the CEO of the National Aviation Services, talking about their plans for Africa.